Hey there, welcome to our AP Legal Zone podcast, brought to you by AP Lawyers. We are your top fix for all weekly law updates, including family, immigration, wills, and estates law. Just a friendly reminder, we are not your lawyers, and everything contained in this podcast is for entertainment purposes only and not to be construed as legal advice. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast so you can stay connected with any updates and get notified about our new episodes.
Hello, I'm Angela Princewill.
And I'm Sherine Abdi, and today we're going to be talking about marriage contracts. So, Angela, what is a marriage contract?
So a marriage contract is an agreement that's entered between any two people who are either already married to each other or who intend to get married, where they set out their obligations and rights under the marriage or on a separation. So there's various things that are included in the marriage contract, and essentially under the law, you can only deal with issues of ownership or division of property, spousal support, the right to direct the education and moral training of your children, born or unborn, and any other matter that you want to deal with in settling your affairs. Now, obviously, there's things that cannot be included in a marriage contract. No.
Yes. So the first thing is that you can't actually include parenting and decision-making responsibilities. Unfortunately, that's not something that's actually, you could, it just wouldn't be enforceable.
Yeah.
And in addition to that is you actually can't limit the other's, or any of the spouse or your intended spouse's rights of possession in the matrimonial home. And that's a very common, I think, misconception is you can't oust the other party or have provisions that if you upon separation the other will vacate the home. Unfortunately, that's, you can add it again, but it won't be enforceable.
We usually add it in our agreements, but we would always say that even though we've said this, we know that it's not something that's enforced. So it's clear in the agreement that it's not enforceable, but that at this point we think it's reasonable for that to be the case. So yeah. That's the whole idea. So really, in its simplest of terms, it's just people organizing their affairs and just planning out what would happen within the marriage. Like with children, for example, maybe you want them to go to a religious school, for example. That's something you could be put in a marriage contract. What we can't put, however, is that they will live with the mother primarily upon a separation.
A shared parenting arrangement, and this is what it'll look like. You'll share holidays, those things would only be considered. And again, and the reason is because the best interests of the children are paramount, and that's what's going to be a factor when you are dealing with a separation.
Because even though you've said you guys agree at this point in time to maybe religious education for your children, that's one of those clauses. It's always going to be subject to the best interest of the children. So I guess in everything family law, if there's one thing that you learned today, it's that it's always subject to the best interest of the child. But yeah, if you agree to religious education and at the time of separation, it's not the best thing for the child, the courts will, I guess, not enforce that part of the contract. But outside of that very limited situation, you want to take your marriage contract very seriously. I like to think of myself as a poster girl for marriage contracts and cohabitation agreements. I don't like legal obligations that are just forced on me. I think that most people are good people and want to support their spouses after several years and wouldn't just leave them. I know I'm being optimistic.
That's a very nice view of the world.
I think most people are good people, but I just think that a lot of the conflict we deal with is people feeling like the law is making them do something. And if you think about it too, how many times, Sherine, have we had people come to us and they didn't even think they were entitled to things? Like most people are actually, if you're on the receiving end, they're pleasantly surprised.
They're pleasantly happy, surprised.
They did not think they were entitled to anything.
Yeah, it's nice to be able to tell them that piece of news where it's the support payer, it's the person that's going to have to share the property.
Yes.
It's sad news to tell them they have exposure.
Remember a client we had like so many years ago, and she was so surprised. She's like, how does anybody not know this? I think it had to do with the marriage property that was brought into the marriage, and that misconception that, well, I get, I brought it in, I keep it.
It's mine.
And funny enough, it's possible that her husband may have thought the same thing, but guess what? When he goes to the lawyer is going to say, no, you don't get to exclude that. There was no marriage contract. So that's why I like rights to be defined. And it may be that definition of your rights may mean that we want the law today to apply. So everybody's on the same page. We want equalization. We don't want to let go of any rights. And then you kind of understand where where things are.
Yeah, I mean, when we're drafting marriage contracts, we're not assuming the worst at the end of the day, but you also want to be prepared for it.
Exactly.
And I think that that's very helpful for people, even if you want to go in accordance with the law from the majority of the division of your assets, but you want things to be structured. At least what would happen in the event that a breakdown of your marriage happens.
And the reality is it could happen. There's probably with the percentages of divorces that we have these days compared to the number of people dying unexpectedly, I think we have a higher divorce rate than an unexpected death rate.
I've seen people separate in the midst of preparing a marriage contract. So it's interesting.
Yeah, so when people wouldn't blink to buy life insurance, but they would hesitate. So there's something about marriage contracts that make people feel like it's bad juju and all of that. Yeah. And I get it from an emotional perspective.
From a cultural perspective, there are people who that isn't what they do. Culturally, it's just not something that's explored. I mean, being lawyers, I think we obviously strongly recommend it. At least even seek independent legal advice about what would happen in the event that you do separate.
Again, you get insurance. If you are fine getting life insurance and planning to die early, I want to believe maybe divorce is probably better than death. So if you're okay planning for your death, don't take your marriage lightly. It's in as much as it's now, well, thanks to Hollywood and life insurance, it's just so romanticized. But remember, when you guys get to court, they don't care about your romance backstory and all of that. Yeah. It's a purely legal process.
And the one thing I hear is even when people separate that don't have marriage contracts would say, well, I never thought she would be or he would be that person that would actually set this aside. That I would actually go after me for any of these things.
Oh my God, if I had a dime for every time I heard that.
It's good, but it can be bad when it's bad. And I think that's the thing you have to remember is, yes, things are great now because, you're in the midst of the good part, until you're in the bad part, then you're like, oh.
Do you know the example I give to my clients? I always say, imagine yourself, how many times have you, when you're super angry, reacted in a way that you did not expect? I mean, these days we all make fun of the Karens and things like that. But just think about it. Have you ever been somewhere and requested to see a manager? Honestly, sometimes you're angry and you do things that you don't expect. So why? You don't know what would cause the breakdown of your relationship. You don't know. Are you going to trust that somebody else is not going to be angry enough to really go out of your way to make your life a living hell? And it may not just be them even asking for what they're entitled to under the law. They might actually want to even push things over and beyond.
Yeah.
So maybe that marriage contract kind of confines things. And it's like, okay, this is what we've agreed to. This is what it got to be.
Especially in a situation of adultery. Sometimes emotions fuel fires that you definitely don't want to be dealing with, especially upon...
And I know you're not planning on cheating. Nobody's planning on cheating. No one ever planned it.
Yeah, no one planned... Obviously, I would hope that no one who's getting married plans to, get divorced and separated down the line. Mm-hmm. But you definitely want to plan for things. And I think one of the things that you noted is that you could actually get a marriage contract even while you're married. You don't have to do it before. And I think that's very surprising to people.
Yes.
Is that I've even done marriage contracts, people several years in their marriage.
Decades into marriage. I think because of the American terminology of prenuptial agreement, so it's just like pre-marriage. No, that's why ours is called a marriage contract. So long as you're not separated, it could be it's just a marriage contract. When we're talking about the kids, it brought my mind to child support for children from a prior relationship. So
this is a good one.
Yeah, I love to, if you're getting married to someone that has a child and you love that child, that's one classic example of where people would do right by people, but they just don't want the legal obligation. You might want to support that child financially and do everything for that child because maybe over during the marriage, this child from a previous relationship felt like your own child. But do you want that legal obligation if the relationship ends? And what if it ended with adultery? Would you really feel like you want to support?
3 years later and you were still found to be in the place of a parent? The obligation can exist. So in a marriage contract, in that scenario, you can actually determine that, you did not, even if you stood in the place of a parent, it doesn't create maybe a moral or legal obligation to support that child or children.
Yeah, post separation. And in that case, like what I like, again, most people, if you stood in the place of a parent, some of them, maybe all they don't want to do is give support to the ex wife or whatever, child support for a child that's not theirs. But they may be quite content paying for things for the child directly. They're fine with the moral obligation. They just don't want that legal obligation.
Yeah.
And there's really no way out of it without a marriage contract. It's amazing how easily you could be found to be in the place of a parent. So please
be careful.
Yes, do your marriage contracts. That's what we're trying to get you to do. So now that we've convinced you, do you think we've convinced them? Is there anything more we can add?
I think we need to keep going. We need to keep going because I think when we talk about what we can actually do in a marriage contract, that might entice you some more, especially if you're coming in with significant properties that you want to protect or spousal support obligations that you also want.
Oh, I have something else I can add that would make them feel better. So if you're one of those that are still not convinced, think about it this way. If you're able to have such a difficult conversation with your bride-to-be or with your wife, to me, that increases the chances that you're actually going to make it. Your relationship is going to make it because it's not an easy conversation. Many couples don't like to talk about money. And unfortunately, money is the root of a lot of the cases that we see.
Yeah.
So if you guys can actually sit down and be able to have a constructive conversation about how you want finances to be dealt with in the future, even though you may not even be on the same page about it, if you can agree on that and get this signed, I think that's great. So, I mean, to me, shows me you're very, you're one of a kind. So I hope that seals the deal for you. Just think about it. If you're in a place where, if you're comfortable with insurance, you should be comfortable with a marriage contract. If you want to make sure that you have great communication with your spouse, you should be able to do a marriage contract. And if you want to make sure that, you do things because you're a good person, not because the law is forcing you to, make sure you get a marriage contract. So now that you're convinced, what can you include in your marriage contract?
I mean, a lot, actually. So you can modify property rights and division. So you can go in accordance with the law, or you can, let's say you came in with specific property, you can actually modify your rights and obligations. So let's say even if it's jointly owned, but you maybe put the majority of the down payment, or let's say it's solely owned, you can actually say, you know what, if we separate, I get 50%, she gets 50%, or I get it all, it's not included. You could do so many you could really just do anything with your property.
Yes.
I mean, in the confines of the law.
Yeah, for the most part, aside from saying this person can't can't possess the matrimonial home, that's the only thing you can do. So for many people because people would usually ask me, what's the usual? And I'm like, there's no usual.
There is no usual.
But I'll give you some broad concepts. So one, the easiest one that I find conceptually is we decide everything, we're separate completely as to property. So everything we brought into the marriage, everything we acquire in the marriage, if it's in my name, it's mine. If it's in your name, it's yours. And that's the way it's going to go. So during the marriage, if I actually want you to have one of our investment properties, I'm not going to put it in my name. I would make sure it's registered in your name because God forbid there's a separation, everything would go according to title. So that's one way to do it. Another way is to say, well, I'm going to keep everything I brought into the marriage. So for people like Sherine was talking about that bringing a home, you can say, well, I would get the value of this home up until the date of marriage. And you know what? Because we're going to share the mortgage, we're going to share things, everything else after that, we can divide. So we would modify it because normally with a matrimonial home, you don't get a date of marriage deduction.
Yep.
So, but we can say in the agreement that you will get that date of marriage deduction, but everything else is the same. And then, like Sherine said, you can just say the law as it applies today is what would work for you guys. But even you can even say that the law today and no future amendments will be applicable, because you have no idea,
Yeah.
if you're separating 20 years from now, if what amendment will be made to the law, and you may not like it. Like, I don't see that happening because it takes so long. But
look how long it takes for anything to happen in law. But
yeah,
but ultimately, it's interesting because you could do so much, honestly, and you have to look at what works for you. So if you're bringing a property in the marriage and you intend for that property to be your matrimonial home, or if it already is being used as your matrimonial home and you want to protect it, then having a marriage contract is the best thing. And you can also exclude pieces of property. So if you, under normal circumstances, if you're married, you would be entitled to equalization. So if you have a specific, let's say maybe you have like a property that you just don't want to include in your equalization, you can actually exclude it from the calculation entirely. Or any bank account, or maybe a pension, So it's interesting.
Yeah, whatever you could do, pretty much what you
really
like.
Everything. You can even have sale terms if you have joint properties, and if you want to be able to buy out the others, you could actually have terminology and
you
terms.
can even include buy-in procedures as well. So if the person wants to acquire equity in the property that you brought into the relationship, they can pay you and buy into the property. So yeah, there's a lot of ways to do it. So it's either everybody keep their own property, or we could deal with specific properties as you please, right?
We can even have like reviewable periods, so you can also amend your
you guys can
contract.
agree that every 5 years we're going to sit together and see if this agreement still works for us. Now, I'm not a fan. I don't really like the reviews, but hey, for some people they might be thinking, well, I'm just concerned about this being a marriage of convenience. So if we're 10 years in, I might want to review this, and I might not want to have a contract with this person. I might be fine giving her everything on earth and more. And so if I'm excluding my property as of 2021, I feel like in 2032, if we're still together, I want to be able to amend that and maybe include some properties that I had already excluded. So that's one thing. So spousal support is another big area that I pay attention to when I'm drafted. So some options is waiving spousal support. That's a huge one.
Yeah, that's oftentimes the only reason people might even do a marriage contract.
Yes.
Is so that they ensure there's not going to be a support obligation.
Yep.
Which is, it
depends on what side you're on.
Yeah, if you're the support payer, like, I 100% understand. If you're the support recipient, some people are also okay with that, like.
Some people are. They're like, I'm independent. I would always make money. Some people are morally
grounded, even if there's a huge discrepancy in income. They don't want that from a moral obligation. It's just, no, I'm okay.
Yeah, true.
So they want that financial independence. But it is worthwhile if you do want to, if you're definitely the higher income earner, you've never put your mind to the fact that there would probably be a support obligation upon the breakdown of your relationship, then you may want to look into getting a marriage contract.
And we're not prophetesses of dooms, and we're not here trying to, but honestly, the number of short marriages that we've seen and where we've had to deal with these issues, it's unbelievable. And remember, when you're married, the default is equalization. So how would you really feel if you married someone and you're earning a very high income, the person's earning no income, and you have all this property, and it's a 2-3 year marriage? Like, equalization is equalization. Now, for the person to get less than half your money, or for their support obligation to not exist, you have to really make a huge argument there,
That's a high threshold.
Yeah, so the marriage contract at least eliminates you having to make that argument. But something else that people do is, like, if you don't want to fully waive support, I've had people do, like, I've done agreements with time limited support, for example. So how you were saying about people that have for moral reasons don't want support. I had a client, and the wife didn't want support from him if they separated, but she said, well, I might need, because right now if we have kids, I might be home. So let's say something happened and we broke up. I just need a transition period. And all she wanted was 6 months. She was like, if we break up, I'm going to go back to work and I just need 6 months to allow me transition in.
That's a very reasonable proposal.
I was surprised.
But yeah, you can structure it, right? So even if it's like, let's say, especially if you're concerned about, someone's intention to marry you, maybe you'll say after 3 years of marriage they'll get $50K lump sum, and then after that 3 years it will go to $100,000. So there's so many different ways to structure it. So however you feel like we should be able to work around it. I mean, obviously if the other person signs it, but the whole goal is to protect you, right? And to at least outline your rights and obligations,
and even the recipient as well, like, so okay, when you're most people don't separate plan on a whim. So they think about it. So it's nice to know, oh wow, if I'm leaving this relationship, I'm not going to get spousal support. So maybe I should try getting a job now. Maybe, okay, I know I'm not, because what's the point of spending all of this legal fees? So let's say it's a 1-year marriage, for example, where you actually don't get equalization because we're able to show to the courts that it's unconscionable. But you've spent tens of thousands on legal fees just to get there. If there was a marriage contract, you would be able to see and be like, okay, I know I'm not getting anything. It's just been a year. I'm not getting any support. So you know what? That's fine. I'm going to move on.
Yeah. And then you guys, in that event, would probably be able to enter into a separation agreement quite easily.
Exactly.
So it's definitely like nice for, I guess, both parties, to be honest, because even if let's say you're not receiving support, you could better plan for it. And we hope that you guys are not getting married just to get spousal support or whatever the reason may be. So we hope you're entering into a marriage for right reasons, but you definitely want to have some obligations that you're well aware of.
Yep, exactly. So let's take it off obligations. Let's talk about mehars. I'm never sure if I'm never sure if I'm pronouncing those right, but pronouncing that right. But yeah, so mehars is an interesting one that's come up a lot lately, and I mean it's generally part of Islamic contracts, right?
Yeah.
Or Islamic marriages, I should say. So I've actually run into a number of these, and it's interesting actually that we sometimes with being in this part of the world, you sometimes think that marriage contract is just exclusive to us here, but it's interesting to find that in lots of other parts of the world, people actually have these conversations, and apparently they actually negotiate the amount of the
I was actually looking at one the other day. It was 250 grams of gold.
Yeah, so that was significant. I believe it was worth about 400,000 or something like that. That was what I think the client had mentioned, or something like that. I don't know what gold prices. Do not quote me on that. I have no idea, but that's what I remember that the client on the file.
Yeah, so I mean, it typically comes with sometimes it's a payment of money, sometimes it's a payment of jewelry. But it has a value.
I almost always see gold. At one point, I started work. I've seen properties. I've seen homes.
Oh,
yeah. Okay. So in one of the most recent one I saw several grams of gold. I saw a specific property that was supposed to be transferred during the marriage. That property had been transferred by the time the matter came to me, and it was property that was to be transferred just upon marriage, not even necessarily on a breakdown, and then the gold was like on the breakdown or whatever had to be done.
Because normally you can request a meher to be paid upon, the terms of your meher would actually list out when a payment would occur or when that transfer would occur, but that's very interesting.
The only thing I want to mention from our context is just remember that without the terms of the meher, you still need a marriage contract. Let me put it this way, because obviously you've drafted something properly. Sometimes unintended consequences happen. So one party might be thinking that the meher is excluded. Newsflash, it's not. It forms part of your NFP. So at the end of the day, you're thinking, well, I negotiated to get these, 200 grams of gold. I wasn't trying to share it with him. It wasn't supposed to form part of equalization. That was mine just for the fact that I got married to him. And that's okay. So if that's what you want, make sure again that you sign a marriage contract that makes it clear that that's what it is and that it's to be excluded from equalization. If not, it would defeat the purpose of
Yeah,
of
I've
getting
actually
married.
had a client come to me say, I don't have to pay her anything in equalization because we have a meher. That's all I'm supposed to pay her upon the breakdown of our separation. Unfortunately, we live in Ontario, so that's not the case.
She will get the
She will
meher,
get the meher. She will get that included as part of the
the
equalization.
equalization.
So, I mean, it definitely have a marriage contract. I mean, I think that's the common theme throughout this entire episode. So, if we haven't believed you enough, just do your own research,
Yeah.
and then if it's a situation that you need to resolve or get advice on, please do.
So important elements of the marriage contract. So now you know kind of what you can put in, and I'll summarize it again by saying you could decide how you want your properties to be dealt with, both properties you currently own and any properties that you acquire in the future. You can talk about what you want to deal with, how you want to deal with support for children that are not your biological children, not children of the marriage. And you can deal with spousal support as well. You can also deal with any other thing. But when it comes to the children, you're really very restricted in what you can contract to, mostly their moral or bring in and religious education, that sort of thing. You can't deal with parenting terms in the contract. So that's what you can do with the contract. And from how long we've talked, you could see it's a lot, because there's a lot of different ways. These issues are major, and there's a lot of different ways that we can structure it to address your concerns. But so now you've drafted, you know the terms you want. And do you just go sit on your table and, or go on your computer, draft it up, and you guys sit there and sign it, and now you're very proud of yourselves?
Some people don't even sign it. So, I mean, that's giving them quite the credit. There are, I guess, people will just have like a common intention, but either will not sign it, will not get it properly drafted. Some of the terms are ambiguous, so, that contract might not hold up. So, I mean, you want to make sure that it's witnessed, it's signed properly, it makes sense.
The terms make sense. That's
Yes.
a huge one, because if it's ambiguous.
If you could get independent legal advice to even make sure that the terms that you've drafted that make sense, or they're in accordance with some.
There's times when I read agreements that people have drafted. I can say 100% of the times where people have given me marriage contracts, no, 99.9, because I do remember one time we had to redraft it.
Oh, 100%.
Because it doesn't, the terms doesn't reflect even what they wanted.
Yeah.
And there's a reason why lawyers, we use a lot of words to say something. It's not, you don't pay us by word. I mean, I heard it used to be a thing a while ago, but no, it's because we know the arguments that our colleagues can make to try to set aside your agreement. So it's important that we use the right terminology so we don't leave like those
it meant
loopholes.
enough for you guys to get to those terms. It should mean a little more to make sure that they're legally binding.
Exactly. I like the way you framed that. So disclosure, any comments on disclosure?
Honestly, I know sometimes people don't want to disclose it because it can make someone a little more greedy, especially if you're coming to maybe like they're not even fully aware of your assets, but that's a problem because sometimes lack of financial disclosure can actually be a ground for the other party to set it aside. So if you want the best protection, disclose your assets, disclose your income. You don't have to disclose every single statement, but I mean, even if you're just doing at the most a full picture of what your assets look like, especially if you wish to exclude them down the or get a date of marriage deduction, if like let's say it's a 20-year marriage but you have a contract, at least there was an acknowledgement that you had some assets on that date that you may not be able to get statements for. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying that that will be 100% effective, but it's something. And
it's important to disclose just so that the other party doesn't, as you said, doesn't rely on it. So that's a good one. But duress is another important thing that you need to think about. I always caution about leaving the agreements too close to the wedding day. Yeah. Sometimes it's not a big deal. I've actually signed a contract with a bride on the wedding day.
Oh wow.
And she was actually getting hair and I think her hair and makeup was being done, but she just wanted it done. but it was independent. I do have notes of our conversation, mostly so the other side is protected. Because remember, my client is the one that would claim duress in this situation if she wanted to, because she would say, I signed it on the day off.
Yeah.
But I was very particular. I said, you don't have to do this today. But she understood everything, and she's like, I just want to move on. I don't want to have to talk to you after my wedding. Like,
yeah, I think most people just want to get it over with so that they can just enjoy.
Yes, she didn't want to have to think of
like
this.
no one wants to talk about the
Yeah.
breakdown of your marriage while
Exactly.
being married. Like, I guess it's
I know
the most ideal thing.
It was bad enough that she was doing it while she was getting hair and makeup done, but she just wanted to walk down the aisle without having to think about this. So the point of that is, if in the future she ever comes back and claims duress, what her lawyer is going to do is request my notes, and unfortunately it's going to say yes, she wasn't under duress, even though she did sign on the date of marriage.
Yeah.
So that's one example, but as a general rule,
Yeah.
I would rather we don't do that. I usually tell people, wait until after the marriage,
like we're very mindful
until the
because
wedding.
sometimes people feel like they need that agreement before they sign, their marriage certificate, and you don't.
Yeah, you could
really
do this
don't.
after. There's people that have retained us before the wedding, and we're not able to have everything wrapped up before the actual wedding, and then we finish it up shortly after. Now, obviously, I don't want to leave it going on too
Longer,
long.
because then people change
Just
their
people just
minds.
get lazy. It's not
Yeah.
important anymore. So I don't want that. You guys have an agreement. Let's just wrap it up. But I would rather take that week or two after the wedding rather than just dealing with
so
it in a rush.
if that's your case, be careful when you're forcing the other party to sign an agreement just because of a deadline.
Because that's undue influence right there.
If they feel like they don't have a choice, then they may have grounds to set it aside. And again, the whole purpose is to have a binding contract that's a little less susceptible to getting set aside for a reason like that. So.
Yeah. Okay, so I hope we've convinced you to get your marriage. So I think that's all we have to add or have to say on the subject today. And until next time, it's bye for now.
Take care. Bye.
Thanks for listening and joining us in the AP Legal Zone. We hope you enjoyed this episode. You can find more episodes by searching AP Legal Zone on anywhere you watch podcasts. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast today so you can stay connected with any updates and get notified about any new episodes.